Tonight we will be exploring in depth the story behind Wandering Cooks and the tour de force, Angela Hirst. But first, the director of Wandering Cooks, Angela Hirst. She created this, Wandering Cooks, 5 years ago and won the Antill's Coolest Company Award for micro-business after just 2 years of trading. Since then, Wandering Cooks has developed well beyond micro-business to become one of the most densely populated kitchen incubators in the world. Can you tell us how the philosophy department became the best home for you?
I think I naturally fall interdisciplinary, probably in the business world as well. And for a year, I just surfed for PhD supervisors. I went from urban sociology, I can't even remember, but to so many different disciplines, trying anthropology, psychology, and everywhere I went, I was faced by methodologies that didn't really make sense to me. And then a good friend of mine introduced me to a woman, Michelle Boulis-Walker, and she was in philosophy. She was doing continental philosophy, that was her focus. And she said to me, she read something that I'd written about food and cities, and she said, why don't you just read this guy for a little while? His name's Emmanuel Levinas. See what you think about his ethics. I feel like there's something about it that might appeal to you and your take on the world. So I started reading his work, the first time I'd ever read any continental philosophy, and it opened my eyes to a way of thinking that made a lot of sense to me, a discursive kind of building of knowledge that I've continued in the way that I work now. So after I finished my PhD, which ended up in philosophy, using Emmanuel Levinas's work to examine the relationship between cities and the places of food production and why it's so easy to avoid responsibility towards the places where our food is produced as urban dwellers. I knew that I wanted to head into more practical work again, and that I wanted to train as someone who really understands what it means to be in a professional kitchen, so I could get real jobs in kitchens. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't find a training anywhere that allowed me to really focus and address where the ingredients were coming from. There just didn't seem to be any kind of relationship between learning to cook and learning to cook from ingredients that at the beginning of their production were ethical. And finally someone put me towards Ballymaloe, which is in Ireland, and at the time it was the only professional training that you could do in the world that was on an organic farm that sourced all of its ingredients from its farm and from local producers. Dorina, I don't know if she still is, but she was the head of the Soil Association of Ireland at the time, and she was very politically driven in the way that she taught. So she was at her best when she was talking about the importance of supporting small producers, markets in Ireland, and growers in Ireland.
How long were you there for?
It was just a short period. It was a full time for 3 months, but it was enough for me to get a piece of paper and recommendations to be able to work at other places. Yeah.
You spent so much time travelling. Was there any one defining moment for you?
I don't feel like I feel like I've lived in a lot of other places, but I'm a terrible traveller. So I don't enjoy moving through spaces fast. I am an introvert in my heart, and I like to travel a worn path and find the stimulus out from that place. It suits me much better to get to know something in a very deep and finely grained way, which is something I think that's happened with Wandering Cooks as well.
Which is a great segue. So how did Wandering Cooks come about?
So Wandering Cooks came about because I finally realised that I knew absolutely nothing about business. So I came back to Brisbane with a child, and was determined to set up my own kind of business, my own food business, to be my own boss. And I had various attempts at that. So some people in this room were party to cooking classes that I did and catering jobs that I did, and I was throwing my heart into making food that had really careful provenance and was completely heartfelt. And in the process, I was bleeding money. Like, I was basically paying people to eat my food wherever I went, just paying them. And I had no real idea how to change that until something flipped in my head. I think it was a friend of mine that gave me a business book. And I realized that it's a discipline. Actually, running a business is a full set of skills and knowledge and wisdom that I had none of. So once I realized that, I started to gain it, because I'm a researcher. I like to gather knowledge. So I worked really hard at starting to develop my business knowledge. And I did this all on paper. I did it through reading and through analysis, and I had someone helping me with my projections, and I was making gorgeous Excel spreadsheets like you've never seen. Amazing. The money I was making on paper. Extraordinary. And I did do some research, and I put it out there that I felt like there was a missing part to the story, that there's so many people out there like me that are really, really passionate about food and would love nothing more than to be able to spend their lives making food for other people, leave their jobs or enter a new life in Australia and be able to share that skill and that love and that taste with the world, but had no way to really access the other kinds of knowledge and resource that they needed to make that possible. So clearly one of the resources was a physical resource. How do you start a commercial kitchen when it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it? And you see so many businesses fail in the process of taking on that enormous leap before they're ready. And I recognized in time that that wasn't possible, that that was crazy, that every kind of business plan that I put together did not make sense when I actually added the cost of a kitchen to it. So I thought I'd make 5 for other people. And I put it out, market research, discovered that there were hundreds of people like me that needed a commercial kitchen, and they were just waiting. They were just waiting for one to turn up. And of course they'd pay $45 an hour. $45 an hour is what I really needed them to pay to be able to install proper commercial baking equipment. Sure, if they were going to use it for more hours and I was starting to fill up the kitchens to capacity, the price could come down, but if they only needed it for an hour, stick 250 cupcakes in there, pay $45, makes sense. It made sense to everyone until it came to actually the doors opening. And that's when you really realize whether your business is going to work. When people actually have to put money down where they had intention previous. So yeah, things changed. That's when I really learned what it meant to run a business.
So where did you turn to for support, for advice, and lastly for funding?
So Matthew, my partner, has been incredible. He's been such a stable force in all of this, always a good ear. And he threw his trust behind this with me, along with my family, who allowed me to... Am I really going to tell you this? I'm going to tell you this. That allowed me to mortgage homes against this place in order to raise the funds. So what do they say about who funds a startup? Who are they? Family, friends, and idiots?
Family and friends is good.
My family are not idiots, but we do live in a house that if this place fails, we will lose.
It won't fail.
So that's Matthew, his trust in me and being able to pull myself through the scenario that I created for us. My family for their trust in this, and then the people that really helped me were people that were in business that I could have extremely real conversations with. So I'd seek them out. You know, I'd test them with a little bit of like telling them a story like that and seeing what they'd throw back at me. And if I got, oh no, it's all been great for me and it's just been busy from the moment I started, you know, I'd put them back where they came from. But if they said to me, it's still hard. I'm 10 years down the track and it still wakes me up at 3 a.m. Or, you know, would have conversations with me where I realized that they'd been through what I'd been through and were still surviving. Or people that would be in my kitchens that were facing the same kinds of dilemmas but on a smaller scale. I think I just made sure from the beginning that the kinds of conversations I was having with people were the kinds of conversations I really wanted reflected back at me, which were ones that were real and demonstrating that just because you make a mistake doesn't mean that you don't have a good business or you can't make a good business out of it.
So when you won that award, that Antilles award, 2 years in, what did that mean and what did it do?
Made me feel really cool. It made me feel, it was the first time that I feel like I'd gotten some recognition that this place was doing something quite special. And yeah, acknowledgement like that is useful. I didn't play it up. Like I'm not very good at playing up that kind of thing, but it gave me a little bit of spirit, but we still were nowhere near out of the woods at all. 2 years in, not at all.
What does sustainable mean to you? What would be sustainable for Wandering Cooks?
So words like sustainability, they have a usefulness, but for me, they sit above something that I find much more potent, which is the kinds of complicated ethical dilemmas that I'm actually trying to tackle with this place, and that give a strong undercurrent to words like that. So to me, sustainability stands in because we need one word to explain something hugely complex. So Wandering Cooks went from something that had ambitions on paper to be a place that could incentivize businesses to make better decisions about where they source their ingredients from and how they worked together as a community. But as the business didn't work and the people didn't turn up, I needed to switch, I needed to veer, I needed to change it just so that it could stay afloat, just so that I could kind of keep going. And that was partly because I was wrong about the business model and what would work. But it was also because once I realized what I could do to fix the situation, the whole of this neighborhood went into construction mode. So we went from getting this place in 2013 and being the tallest building was the building beside us, 7 stories high. And there was a hole in the ground on the corner of Cordelia Street. And the rest of this place was warehouse. We went into an old air conditioning warehouse when we came here. We went from that to a year later having 20 stories going up across the road and 20 stories going up 3 meters away here. Our lane being closed for the development. Jackhammers all day, trying to make the new business model work, which I can explain more about if you like, but not being able to because we were so completely surrounded by this activity. And just being really, really hopeful that we would survive long enough to see the output, which would be lots of people. And we did, we survived. And surviving was the hardest thing that I and my staff have ever done. I mean, maybe not my staff. Maybe it wasn't as hard. I think it was hard for some staff who survived the time period. But yeah, it was definitely the hardest thing that I've ever done. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. Your passion was to give small ethical food startups a leg up, and you've spoken about your kitchen incubator. But there's also a claim that you have the largest, most densely populated incubator in the world.
Yeah.
So what numbers are
Well,
we
not the
talking?
most, but we're definitely in the top 2% of incubators. So that's based on the number of kitchen customers that are using the space. And I discovered that when I went to Rutgers and I started researching incubators last year and saw how they work in the States. So the States are 5 years ahead of us in incubator terms. They had a very strong cottage industry licensing system which allowed people to work from home but only under strict circumstances. And outside of that, those circumstances started to change and it became very difficult. So they started putting in place lots of very small incubators. And you see them in Brisbane. One started at the same time as us, and the model is generally I had a kitchen. I was either a cafe or a catering company, and it didn't work, or I need to subsidise the revenue of this space, so I will get other people to take on some of the space. So that's that's the sort of ground floor level of the incubation that happens. And then there's the kind of incubation that is very strong in the States and is something that I think a lot of governments here are interested in, which is the kind of tech incubation food production line. So can this small business idea turn into a $200 million brand? And if I add technology to the picture, will it help that happen? Can I find investors to help build this brand up? So there's lots of that. And then there's what you call social incubators. So I realised when I went over to Rutgers that we're considered a social incubator in those terms, except that in the States, social incubators are actually supported by lots of funding and government grants. So their pricing is the same as what our pricing ended up being in order to build such a densely populated kitchen. So that was one of the things that I learned very early on when we were hemorrhaging, that I needed to speak directly to my customers and tell them what was going on, which is what I did in the terrifying and very teary meeting, and told them that if this was going to last, if this was going to stay, then I needed to do a deal with them. They needed to spend more of their time actually cooking in my kitchens rather than in their home kitchens and just using me to be legitimate. They would need to have minimum hours that they would spend in the kitchens, and I would reduce their prices down to a level that really made it ridiculous not to do it. So the prices of the kitchens went from being between $24 and $45 an hour, which was the viable model as I saw it and as the capital saw it, to $12 an hour. So once they were down at $12, they started to fill quite quickly. And we were working with hugely populated kitchens. And so it ranges, and I haven't done a count lately, but around the beginning of last year, it was about 100 food businesses, and it was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. So there was lots of activity, lots of things going on. I felt like I was starting to see a way through this, because I thought, well, if we get this full, then we have a demand, and we can solely make the prices ones that actually will make this business viable at the same time. And the construction's going to stop eventually, which means that we can actually have a viable event space that can build its own revenue subsidization model for these kitchens to continue to exist. So that's what we did. So eventually the construction stopped, and we could start to occupy the car park and make this place beautiful. And we really, really built the bar. We spent a lot of time building a sense of what we wanted to do with drinks. And we brought in that kind of customer that we needed. We needed the customer that drinks because we need good drinkers. We're not talking about heavy drinkers, but good drinkers that appreciate the quality of the artisan drink world here in order to subsidize these guys. So actually the way that the space works is there's only 10 hospitality incubators here. So only 10 of these businesses are actually here working towards having their own restaurant. The rest of the businesses are working in between those sessions, creating food products for 2 hours here and 4 hours here, and whenever their stock runs out. So they're the multitudes, and I think that's what makes us really dense, is that model that we've created. And that's why being somewhere densely populated is so important to the model, because it's the thing that allows those food product makers to experiment. Because if we were just based on food product makers and we hadn't set up this other kind of business model to subsidize that, we would have died 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Just in the interests of time, Wandering Cooks embodies the threads of all your studies, travels, and experiences, from architecture and space to permaculture, to ethics and philosophy, to travel and to teaching. What are you planning to do with your new grant and training program? Very briefly before we break.
So the new grant is really about building up a training and skill development program that allows people to work through those moments of crisis to the other side. Because really what I've done is I've created an opportunity with these kitchens, which is that you can try things out with less risk than I had to create them. But in doing so, I also make it easier to quit. So once you're out in the world, or you haven't been through a place like this, and you have your own space, then you start to experience the kinds of ups and downs that we've experienced as a larger kind of business model. And there's so many people that are on the edge of losing their business. It's unbelievable. And when we set up this training, I wasn't clear that that's who the training was for. But now that I've put it out there and I'm receiving a lot of applications back, a large component of the training is specifically for people that are right on the brink of saying, I don't think I can last any longer.
Wonderful. I'd like to just close with a quote from you. You said in True Love and Clean Cutlery, "One day we will be both big and small at once, thousands of beautiful businesses transforming our food and drink culture together." Thank you very much, Angela.
Thank you.